Titanic is one of those stories that just grips us and won't let go. Like Vesuvius and Pompeii, or the Battle of Waterloo, just on a bigger scale. It's a tale that seems to transcend cultures and continents. Since I was 5 years of age, I've been obsessed with the story, and it's little wonder. From the mid-90s through to the early 2000s, there was a string of spectacular documentary films and books produced by a group of experts and visionaries. To be young and impressionable at that time, like I was dangerous, because inevitably you'd end up with a Titanic obsession. In fact, I'd wager that many of the viewers of this channel have the same origin story. This week, Titanic was in the news again, for extremely exciting reasons. Magellan, the deep-sea exploration company, released their scans of the ship's ruined stern section in their virtual experience vROV pilot, and it coincided with a big-budget National Geographic documentary. Actually getting the opportunity to explore Titanic's wreck as it stands and in your own living room is pretty wild. It's the kind of technology that not too long ago would have seemed like science fiction. But I can't just explore it on my own. I need a friend to join me on my virtual exploration of the wreck, and I have just the person in mind. There are few people who know Titanic better than Ken Marschall. He's an extraordinary man, a veteran of Hollywood and motion picture production, a genius artist capable of creating photorealistic paintings, and an unparalleled researcher who's been part of the Titanic story now since he did his first painting of the ship back in 1967. He's also, and I hate to embarrass him by admitting this, but I'm going for it, one of my childhood heroes. Ken and I have planned to explore Titanic's wreck in Magellan's vROV pilot to show you all about what happened to the ship when she sank, and what's happened since she was first rediscovered and photographed back in 1985. But first, we needed to sit down and discuss Ken's incredible career and his long-standing association with the wreck that began long before it was even found.
First got involved with the wreck of Titanic. It would be probably right after Clive Cussler's best-selling book, Raise the Titanic, came out. What was it, in 75 or 76? I got word in 1976 that a big budget motion picture was going to be made of this book, and that it was going to be done at CBS Studio Center, which was right near me where I lived at the time, and near LA in Southern California. I really wanted to get on board. At that point, I was 26 years old, let's say. And I had seen so many Titanic movies, that had been done in the past, and there were so many mistakes in them. The models were always so inaccurate. The funnels were too taller. There was just inexcusable mistakes. And that leads into the fact that I have kind of a perfectionistic nature, and I want every rivet and every porthole to be in the right place, and it's really important to me. So I naturally collected photographs and deck plans through the years. The first painting I ever did of Titanic was in 1967 when I was still in high school. Walter Lord helped me out. He made a wonderful photostat for me of a rigging plan that he had gotten from Harland and Wolff. I could go on forever about all the stuff in the past and how I got into Titanic. But relating to the wreck, it was Raise the Titanic would be the first time I got involved with the wreck, hypothetically. And when I heard that they were going to be making this major motion picture, and that Stanley Kramer, the famous director, was signed on, to direct it. And Bill Creeber was going to be the production designer who worked on Poseidon Adventure as the production designer. Sadly, he's gone today. Both of them, of course, have passed away. But time is flying so quickly. I'm getting old. Anyway, I wanted to get involved so badly that I did a little acrylic painting, about this big, maybe 10 inches wide or something. My concept of how the ship would look after it was raised, because I wanted to excite the producer, the director, the production designer, the art director, and get them to hire me to work in some way to help them with the model, because I knew they were going to be building a nice model. So I took it in and I showed it to Stanley Kramer and Bill Creeber, and it did the trick. I mean, they liked it. They ended up consulting it. Syl Zimmerman, who was their lead painter at the studio there, actually, was looking at my rendering to come up with different concepts for how to age the side of the ship.
With Ken on the production team, working with a skilled team of artists and visual effects specialists, attention turned to the hero model, an enormous reproduction of the ship that would need to be big enough to look convincing as the real thing. Remember, this was in the days before CGI. Everything had to be done in the workshop, and Ken, with his detailed knowledge and eye for perfection, would play an important role. But this was also a time before the actual wreck of Titanic had been discovered. Ken's concept paintings from the time kind of optimistically show Titanic still intact, and the enormous hero miniature would be based on these conceptual artworks.
Well, it's a crazy story. I mean, yeah, I think I might have had the second funnel still standing in my rendering, or maybe the third, because I knew the first one had fallen off. And, there were witnesses that saw that at the time during the sinking. But then when they were actually, producing the model and doing the storyboards. By the way, I was actually asked by Bill Creeber he said, "Do you want to do the storyboard of the prologue for the movie?" I had never done anything like this before. This is my first time ever, working on a film project. Every day, driving in and it was the most exciting thing I'd ever done in my life until Jim Cameron's movie came along, for sure.
Right.
But the concept ended up, it's Hollywood. And this is what you run into all the time. So the next thing I knew, they had a little clay model of, this is how we're going to show the wreck, and then the model was only about this big. It was, I think they used the Revell kit, the little, 18 inches long, that had just come out at that time. And they had it in this little clay diorama of how we're going to make the underwater contours, the geology and all this. Anyway, they basically had the first funnel in place and the fourth funnel in place. And one of the other two in the middle, they had half broken. And I said, well, what are you doing here? I'm getting every rivet in the right place on this 55-foot miniature that we're building, that's another whole story. I mean, that's what was so exciting about it, to be able to make this gigantic model, the largest Titanic since the Titanic. That's what I kept saying. But I said, what are you doing? We know that the first funnel, fell off. There are witnesses. Yeah, but if we break off the first funnel completely, then it looks like it's only a 3-funneled ship. And these people in the audience, they're just regular folks. They know that the Titanic had 4 smokestacks. So we got to kind of show the length of the distance between the first and the fourth funnel. This is the kind of artistic license, like in the film industry that, drives somebody like us up the wall. Because here it's a historical fact. Witnesses watched, people were killed when the first funnel fell over. It's gone. I knew survivors who watched the first funnel fall over and described it, but no, we need to show the first. So you live with frustrations like that on projects that are aimed toward the general public. And then later in the model building, we had it about 95% finished when Stanley Kramer had to leave the project and we had to hunt for a new director. And I was not rehired after that, after I'd been promised that I would be rehired to finish it and rig it properly, make sure it's absolutely ready for film. Never got the call. One of the I wasn't credited, not one line of credit, at the end of the movie, which just broke my heart after all the work I'd put into that. But again, that's the way it goes. A whole new team moves in and takes over the production of a film. And in the end, the movie ended up, not being very successful, to say the least. I think it was Time Magazine's, in 1980, Time Magazine voted it second worst movie of the year or first worst movie of the year, something like that. So in the end, I guess I don't regret not being credited in it. It really stung. But anyway, as the model was almost finished, we had to shut down the production. I was literally like the last guy out of the stage. I think it was stage 3, where we had these huge models stored. When they locked her up and we went, there was like a 6-month hiatus before Jerry Jameson got on board to pick up the project again and direct it and take it, to completion. But So I wasn't rehired, and somebody else finished out the model, rigged it the way they wanted to, put in these silly pipe vents forward the foremast, because they wanted it to, instead of just cutting these silly vents off of their full-size ship that they had found in the Mediterranean, they said, well, it's cheaper for us to put on these silly vents on the model. So again, just horrors. When I saw it, I didn't even know they'd done this until I saw the film. I remember I saw it at the Hollywood Cinerama Dome right shortly after it opened, or the first week, something like that. And here are these unsightly vents on the forecastle and other mistakes. And I just thought, what have you done to my baby? Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry for being so verbose, but that was the first wreck painting, pseudo wreck painting, even though this was way before the ship was ever found. We had no idea what it would look like.
Raise the Titanic proved to be such a box office flop that one of its producers went on to say it would have been cheaper to lower the Atlantic. Interestingly, Ken would go on to have an entire career in filmmaking as a talented matte painter and model maker. In the mid-70s, he completed a course in motion picture special effects at USC. In 1979, he joined Graphic Films Corporation, a Hollywood-based studio that created photorealistic shots for documentaries produced by NASA and others. For Ken, who specialized in photorealism, it was a natural fit, and it started a career that would see him work on films ranging from Star Trek the Motion Picture to James Cameron's The Terminator. His work is even in The Princess Bride. But for the prolific artist, Titanic-related projects were never far away. His next chance to work on Titanic came in the early 1980s, when eccentric West Texas oil tycoon Jack Grimm set out to find the lost ship.
Well, he had a guy named Mike Harris who led an expedition to go out in 1980 to look for the Titanic. Arguably the first serious effort, as far as I know, to really put a lot of technology into it and get photography and ROVs down on the bottom and look for it. They didn't find it in the end. And then they tried again in 81 and again didn't find it, but they saw something that they thought might be the blade of a propeller. It was probably just a rock, but we're going to call it the blade of a propeller. That was the hook to, make this documentary. And anyway, I was hired to do this painting, hypothetical scene of the stern of the ship looming, in the foreground, and way up in the distance, you can see the support ship trolling along, dangling an ROV down below it. Completely ridiculous. Of course, you can't see through 12,500 feet of ocean. It was just, it's a movie poster. It's designed to sell the movie. So I did that painting in, I guess, 1980 or 81. And in the end, they had me design the whole poster. I mean, the graphic, the font, the title, everything. I made the Search for the Titanic was the title of the documentary. And I made the letters, I tried to make them a buff color to match it's pretty silly.
Grimm's expedition had failed to find the wreck, but still, efforts were underway to actually locate the ship and finally find her. The race was on, and Dr. Robert Ballard, retired Navy officer and PhD holder in marine geology and geophysics, planned to set out with the renowned Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. As early as 1973, the wreck of Titanic had called to him, but a 1977 expedition had been a failure. In 1985, word got out that he was going to try again.
It might have been Ed Commuta, the president of the THS at that time, who told me that, it looks like something's going to happen this year. This summer, Bob Ballard is going out, and he's involved with National Geographic. And for certain, there's going to be a wonderful, article, a feature article in Geographic, if he finds the wreck. So again, I did the same thing that I did with Raise the Titanic. I did a little bit bigger this time. I did a proposal painting, a concept of, hey, this is maybe what Bob Ballard's going to find, and I sent the original painting like an idiot off to the National Geographic covers department. And with a letter explaining myself, introducing myself, and if he finds the wreck, I would love to illustrate for the magazine. a dream for someone, like myself at that age. Geographic thanked me very much. But anyway, in the end, they decided not to use me as their illustrator. That's the bottom line. They had their own staff artist illustrate the article, which came out in December of '85. And I think I could have actually illustrated a little bit better than what ended up in the magazine. But even then, even that far back, I think I could have produced, some much more dramatic paintings than what was done.
The news came in. A French-American team, led by Ballard and oceanographer Jean-Louis Michel, had done it. They'd found Titanic.
That's Alvin in the background, sitting on the deck. There were 350 electric heaters on the Titanic, and the bottom was just full of these space heaters. This is where we put the plaque, right on the deck surface. This is the stern section edge. We were dropping down to see if we could see the name Titanic, and as you can see, time has wiped its name away.
So Bob Ballard goes out, he finds the wreck. There's all this hullabaloo. In the fall of, September 1st is when we found the ship. By September 3rd, of course, the media was just going crazy. For some crazy reason, I was invited onto Nightline to appear with Ted Koppel on September 3rd. I remember saying, get Walter Lord, why me? I don't know. They wanted me. I had done a number of paintings, I guess, at that point that had been published. And anyway, I was invited, and so I went up to the ABC studio up in LA, and we did the Nightline, which was a very embarrassing situation for me. One of life's most embarrassing moments, because the audio went out in the middle of the interview. I was sitting there like this. First of all, we were told, I'm sorry, I'm getting off track here, but I'm supposed to be talking about the wreck, right? But it's an interesting story. I was told, you're set up in front of the camera, you're sitting on a stool or in a chair, kind of like a high chair thing. And they've got the earpiece in, and I'm saying, am I going to be able to talk to Ted Koppel first? I mean, I want to make sure that he doesn't ask me this. I'm not a historian for another. Don't have him ask me, tell us some wonderful stories about heroism on board. And where was John Jacob Astor standing when Titanic took her final plane? Please, don't worry about that, Ken. Yes, you'll have a chance to talk to Ted Koppel, and you can get your ducks in a row. We're not on for a half an hour. So I sat there. I had a couple of friends with me. Don Lynch was there, and a couple of others. And Ted Koppel never comes on. He maybe came on for 10 seconds right before we started live. Hey, so how do you pronounce your name, Ken? Marschall? Okay, all right, very good. Are we ready to go then? All right. Welcome to Nightline. And it starts, and I'm thinking, oh, great. Nobody got the message to him. So anyway, the audio is working fine for, I don't know, a few minutes. He turns to me and says, Ken, tell us some stories. Tell us about the heroism on board. I'm not kidding you.
I suspect that many people are listening because they want to hear some more of those stories. The kind of thing that we just heard. This great rich man, Mr. Guggenheim, and his butler getting dressed so that they go down like gentlemen. Tell us a couple of stories, will you?
Well,
and I struggled my best, it's not my thing. I'm a rivet counter guy. I'm a visual historian. I'm not in any sense a social historian. It's not my thing. I don't go there. And they go to another one of the guests. There was a guy there from Woods Hole, and Clive Cussler was the other guest. That was the first time I ever spoke to him, was on Nightline on that occasion. And then he eventually comes around to me again and asks me another question. And it was the best question ever.
If it were possible now to find one artifact from that ship, or if it were possible to answer one question that for you has remained unanswered all these years, what would that be?
It's the one I really wanted to answer. Right at that moment, the audio goes out. I start talking or something, and then I'm looking around the room, and I can't hear anything, and I'm trying to make little gestures. I can't hear. And here's Ted Koppel live on air on the East Coast. Ken, can you hear me? Well, it appears that we've lost the audio.
No.
Clive Cussler jumps in, And he says, "Oh, I'll take that question." And he goes running off with it, and it was, oh my God. So eventually they get the audio working again, and I fumbled through the rest of the show. But it was a bad experience. It was a bad situation.
Don't be too hard on yourself, Ken. I think you handled yourself pretty well. But media appearances aside, Ken's real focus was on what was happening in the North Atlantic, where Ballard and his team were photographing the ship that hadn't been seen in 73 years. For Titanic enthusiasts around the world, it must have been incredibly exciting. For Ken, it brought the unbelievable opportunity to work on painting the wreck for real.
Bob Ballard goes out, he finds the wreck in September of 85, and he vows that he's going to go back in the summer of 86 with a submarine, that he's actually going to go down in the submarine. For the first time, human eyes will see Titanic. This was a really big deal. And I knew that was coming up. And again, I wanted to produce artwork for, it would be the cover of Time magazine. It would be the cover of Geographic. If something's going to happen. So I set my sights on Time magazine. And all I had to go on up until that point was the imagery that he had brought back in 85. And those are largely, well, there are only two things. He had Argo, which was black and white, kind of grainy, noisy video. I think they called it a dope on a rope that just got towed back and forth and around.
Right.
And then the Angus vehicle. And Angus stands for Acoustically Navigated Geological Underwater Survey, if I recall. And that took color strobe shots, something like maybe every 5 seconds or something. And that vehicle was towed back and forth across the bow section. And I don't think the stern section, they had not discovered the stern yet.
Right.
In fact, when Bob Ballard came back at the end of the expedition in 85, he said the bow just seems to end and we can't see the stern. I had nothing to go on for the stern, but that's fine. I was just going to paint the bow. And all I had to go on were these Angus strobe shots, the few that had been released to the media after the 85 dive. So all that later stuff, I didn't have at my fingertips. And I created a painting to propose to Time magazine for a cover. I said, Bob Ballard's going out there. We know he's found the wreck and he's going to go explore it with a sub and they're going to come back with wonderful color photography. You guys have got to do a cover story on it. And how about this idea for a cover? And to my great delight, I was contacted back. I don't remember if it was a phone. It must have been a phone call by the covers lady, the head of the covers department at Time magazine. She says, Ken, we got your painting. I think I sent him the original painting as it looked. I could be wrong in its preliminary state. She said, we love it. We are doing a cover story as long as it's successful. And as long as, something terrible doesn't happen in the world and it gets bumped from the cover, we would love to use this on the cover. Of course, at this point, I'm passing out. So exciting to me. She said, there's just one thing. We need to know if it's really as accurate as you can make it. And he's out there right now in the North Atlantic on the Atlantis II. And would it be possible for you to have a radio phone call out there to the ship to just make sure, because I had already told them, that I wasn't sure about exactly what the bridge looked like.
Right.
And that I've got it. I'm pretty sure, from the 85 Angus images, I'm pretty sure that I'm 90% there, but I certainly have questions. And if it's going to be on the cover, anyway, a radio call was set up with the Atlantis II while Bob Ballard was out there. And I spoke to an intermediary who worked at Woods Hole, who relayed my questions to Bob, who was like in another room, running the Angus or the Argo or some vehicle down there. And I said, can you tell me, what does the bridge look like? Are the bridge windows still intact? Because there's like mixed messages about, well, we saw instruments on the bridge, but there doesn't seem to be a roof. It was vague things like this. That's what I had from the 85, interviews. And he said, yeah, hold on a second. And I'm waiting. And then he comes back. He says, yeah, Bob says the bridge is like all messed up. And there are instruments on the bridge but the roof is gone and the windows are gone. I said, okay, great. And I'm like writing notes down. And there was another question or two that I had, something like that.
Your original concept, like the one done for Nat Geo, Raise the Titanic, show Titanic in a fine state of preservation, and then to actually hear, the bridge isn't there at all.
Oh yeah, it was once the wreck was found and we saw those initial pictures, in the fall of '85, some of them color, some of them black and white, some of the black and white, sitcam video, from Argo. It was very disappointing to see how destroyed parts of the bow section were. We hadn't seen the stern yet at all, but still the forecastle was in such amazing condition with all these recognizable, machinery. The deck features were there. I could see the bridge. I could see the cargo cranes. It was coming together, and I was getting over the initial disappointment of, the ship is so wrecked. We knew it was going to be sitting on the bottom. I wanted to say that earlier when I did my proposal painting and sent it off to National Geographic. People say, well, how did you know? Why did you paint it on sitting on its keel? And it's a simple answer. Most wrecks that are largely intact in deep water land on their keels.
Mm.
The vast majority do, because the hydrodynamic shape of the hull, the weight is lower down in the hull, so it tends to go down bottom first. Even if it's capsized on the surface, it will right itself. And if you look at the Bismarck, for example, 16,000 feet down, and she's on her keel. And you could name many, many other wrecks. The ones that aren't were like, for example, Andrea Doria, which was in the process of capsizing right at the surface, and Lusitania, which was doing the same. They're in such shallow water, they were in the process of righting themselves when they landed and ended up on their sides. That's why I did that painting for National Geographic, that proposal painting. Sitting on its keel. I was just sure that it was going to be on its keel. And we thought so too when we did Raise the Titanic as well. They had some naval advisors and archaeologists working with them. They said, no, you ought to have it on the keel. Yeah, so I had this radio conversation with the Atlantis II, the second support ship that Ballard had in 1986. It answered my final questions to a point. I think the painting maybe was FedExed back to me or something so that I could make these final touch-ups, if I vaguely remember. I gave it a final varnish, a spray varnish, let it dry for a day or two, and then fired it back to Time Magazine. And she said, we got it. Thanks for making the changes. It looks great. Now, if the president doesn't get shot or something terrible doesn't happen, it'll be on the cover. You'll see it on, I don't know what day it was, like Sunday on the newsstands. And this was like a Thursday. And so then for the next several days, it was like I was pregnant, just waiting and hoping, will this go? Will this happen? Will it be healthy? Will it work? And sure enough, there it was on the newsstand just a few days later. And it was quite a thrill. And Bob Ballard, as soon as he got back to shore, there was the magazine waiting for him, or within a day or two or something. And he said, this is the guy that called and wanted he said, that is just about what we saw. That is really something else. And I want this guy, if I do a book about the discovery of Titanic, I want this guy to illustrate it for me. And that's how that got started. He and Madison Press Books in Toronto got together and started their book project for the discovery of the Titanic.
Discovery of the Titanic is one of those seminal books that all Titanic buffs just have to own. I like it so much, I have 3 copies. It's a unique, special record of the ship as she was in 1986. Very important to us today because Titanic no longer looks like that after years of decay. But crucially, it sparked a working partnership between Ken and Ballard that would result in a series of spectacular illustrated records of famous wrecks like Bismarck, Lusitania, and the USS Yorktown. Of course, the first book, Titanic, would prove to be a huge challenge, but it was one which Ken was eager to attack.
around December of '86, I was flown to Woods Hole to go through thousands of feet of 35 millimeter Angus footage, the strobe shots, look at the videos and pick out, images and slides, certain selects for the book. But Hugh Brewster, the editor there at Madison Press Books, accompanied me, and he and I were going through a lot of this stuff. But I spent a lot of time down in the basement at the Deep Submergence Laboratory there, looking at these Angus images. And there were 3 cameras in this Angus vehicle shooting strobe shots. Like I said, as it was slowly towed over the wreck at an altitude of maybe 30 feet, 40 feet, I don't know. Maybe every 5 seconds, the strobe would go off, and these 3 cameras would shoot. And there were 3 different lenses. There was like a 16 millimeter lens, a 28, and a 50 or a 55 millimeter lens. So you had 3 different zooms of an object. If you happen to see an object, it might show up in one of the telephoto shots. It might not, because the thing was moving fairly quickly, the vehicle. But that's what I was looking at. I spent so many hours down there in the in that basement. Bob Ballard's office was just up the stairs and adjacent. And other people had gone through and looked at this this Angus footage in a cursory fashion way before I got there in December. And one of the guys I was talking to, he was in and out a lot as I was looking at the thing, and I saw, you see shoes here, a shoe there, random shoes, a suitcase with shoes in it, and so forth. But I found a pair of shoes that were absolutely matching, and they were boom, boom, like this, separated just about 2 feet apart, out in the middle of nowhere, just on plain sediment, no suitcase nearby. And you can imagine the tingle that went through me when I came across this. I'm advancing the film and looking at these images, taking notes, studying, sketching, and all of a sudden here's this thing, and I'm staring at it. Nobody mentioned this to me. And so I asked the guy who wandered in at one point, and I said, "There's a pair of shoes here, and they're don't worry about it," he said. "We see there's tons of shoes down there. We've seen lots of those." And he walks out. I said, "Okay." Went on another 50, 80 feet, meters and meters of just empty mud, part of a teacup, blah, 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 and then another pair of boom, boom, perfectly matching shoes. I thought, well, he says they're all over the place like this, and they don't think, Bob Ballard has repeatedly said, no, we've seen no bodies, and that's the narrative. So went on. Wasn't long before I found my 3rd pair, just like that, another one. These were boots. At this point, I didn't mention anything to this other guy. I just, this kind of makes me tear up to think about it. I just quietly got up. I went up the stairs, went into Bob's office. He was sitting behind the desk. I said, "Bob, I think I've found some bodies." He looked at me. He put down his pencil or whatever he was doing, quickly got up and raced down the stairs. Show me. I said, "See these? They're matching, and they're in the middle of nowhere. They're just, what else could it be? And I showed him, I had marked the notations of the navigation, the time code for the other 2 that I had found, because I was keeping this long list of all this wonderful stuff that we were finding. Showed him the other 2, and he just says, "My God, what else can that be?" So that was another one of those memories I'll take with me, to my grave, that apparently I was the guy who first discovered, these shoes that really couldn't have been anything but worn by a person. Now, immediately people started talking. The word got around, of course, the submergence lab, and people start talking and arguing about it. And well, but wait a minute, bodies bloat and they float, and there's no way. Why would a body end up? But they have their biologists there as well. And one of these biology guys said, no, once you're dragged down far enough in a ship or with debris or in the suction and your lungs fill with water, have you ever done that in a swimming pool where you exhale all your air and you sink all the way to the bottom?
Mm.
He says, it's absolutely possible that these went all the way on down. So that pretty much cinched it. So anyway, I should shut up and let you talk for a
No, all of those little human touches. The Marconi room, I remember, and seeing all the settings exactly as Bride and Phillips had left them. I mean, how eerie.
I'm not the Marconi expert. That would be other people on the team. But yeah, that was wonderful to see these instruments still set in their in the condition and the arrangement, the settings that they were that night, unmistakably. That was where the last Bride, left him when he rushed out of the room. Those are the moments of human history that actually pop out, where you realize it's like the time travel thing, and there's so many examples of that too that I could go into, recovering artifacts, smelling the perfume for the very first time, all of that, being there when these artifacts first came up. But that's later in the story. I should also mention that when I was there in December 86, I was already doing proposal sketches for the book. The book was already being planned. I was already, I think, in the works. Obviously, it was because Hugh Brewster was there, and he was the editor at Madison Press. So we were picking out selects for the book, and I was doing sketches. And there's a photograph of me talking to Bob over a desk and showing him a sketch that I was coming up with. I did several sketches. Little preliminary concept views for paintings that I would do for the book. And I ended up, appearing at news conferences with Bob Ballard once or twice and being asked questions by the media. And one big event at the Titanic Historical Society in 1987, I remember, and I had already done a number of the paintings for the book, but one of them was only half finished, and that was the view of the stern section with the debris in the foreground. And we were showing them up on the screen. And Bob Ballard was seeing some of these for the very first time. The pressure was on. I mean, I had to do so many paintings in a short amount of time in order for it to get to press, and it takes a lot of time for the publishing. They wanted it out in the early fall of 87, if I recall. And so when this unfinished painting of the stern section comes on, to the average person, it probably looked basically finished. And I'm going through them, and this is this, and that one came on. And I'll always remember another one of these moments I'll never forget. The audience reaction at this THS convention, Titanic Historical Society, there were 150 people, including survivors. Many survivors were there. The moan, the awe, and the applause that when that painting, that one unfinished painting ended up on the screen. I wanted to say, no, it's not finished. But people were so blown away to see what the stern looked like and how mangled it was. And Bob Ballard said, so that's what I was exploring. Because he didn't even, because at the time, it was like, the thing that he often says is, it's like being in a forest of sequoias in a heavy fog and going through with a weak flashlight and trying to, that's all you could see. And they had a sense of what the stern looked like, but I had taken all of these individual photographs and video and gotten screen grabs, and in order to do these paintings for the book Discovery of the Titanic, put it all together in a way that today you can do with photogrammetry, hands off, but back then it all had to be hand done. And I'm pretty proud of myself that I was able to pull them all together and produce something that was fairly accurate and has basically stood the test of time. However, the astern view of the bow section, even in 86, Bob Ballard had not been able to get anywhere close to the boilers. He had only looked down on it, that area from the sub and the vehicles he was using at the time. There was no imagery showing inside. And I just had to assume that it was just dark and ill-defined under there. So the painting that appears in the book and the reprint of the book, I believe, which came out later, well, there have been numerous reprints of Discovery of the Titanic, but anyway, there's no boiler showing. So that was a big mistake, and it's a perfect example of, you know, you use what you have at hand, and you know, when there's no information, you just have to make it up. And I had to do that, you know, on a lot of these paintings. There are whole areas of the side of the ship that were never imaged by Ballard, and so I just had to imagine, well, if this part's buckled up here, there must be a bulge down below, down at D deck and E deck, you know, because the hull had to take up that slack somewhere. And turns out there are bulges, but not where I thought they were.
It's exactly this kind of informed, educated guesswork that makes Ken so unique. Not only is he a talented photorealistic painter, but he can interpret tiny, grainy wreck photographs, process them, and create accurate representations of what's going on miles beneath the surface of the ocean. His work's so realistic that a lot of people think his paintings are photos or mosaics. Hell, when I was a kid, I thought they were photos too. They're that good. But the process was hard going.
I did create my own mosaics of certain limited areas by taking, you know, photographs with film off of a TV screen, off of a monitor. This is way before flat screen monitors, way before being able to get screen grabs of anything. So I had the camera set up, and I would photograph as the Argo vehicle would move along the stern. I made a lot of mosaics for myself. And of course, there's parallax shift with it's a nightmare. But I do wonder, who else would have gone to the lengths that I did at that time with my exuberance and my excitement over, you know, that I was creating something that nobody's ever seen before. If this works, if I can pull this all together, you know. And one thing that I wanted to add to my experience at Woods Hole in December of '86, you mentioned the human element, going through all of this imagery and coming to grips with the fact that you're looking at the shoes that surely a body must have worn. It's the other aspect of it is me coming to grips with the absolute destruction of the ship, which I kind of considered my ship at that point. You know, I mean, I had already painted the ship since I was in high school. I'd been commissioned to do box covers for model kits, and on and on and on and on and on. And I always thought that when the wreck was found, it would be in one piece. That was the official opinion, you know, at the Board of Trade, and that's what Lightoller thought. And even those survivors, many of them, and I knew some of them, said, we watched the ship break in half. I saw the funnels go this way. Ruth Blanchard, for example, Ruth Becker, was very clear on that. She was 12 years old at the time, but a very mature 12 years old. She could describe the details of it, and many other survivors that I spoke to. I guess I've spoken to maybe 20 survivors and known probably 5 of them quite well. We're very fortunate. And of course, they're long gone now, all of them.
Yeah.
But I always thought that the ship would be found on her keel in one piece. Whether the funnels would be there or not, well, we can hope that maybe one might still be standing and yada. But to be at Woods Hole there and to go through all this imagery, and it was an autopsy for this body that had literally been blown up. And again, it brings tears to my eyes. I mean, and I've said this before in a documentary, but I phoned home one night to a friend of mine, and I said, my ship, it's gone. It is so gone. It is just blown to smithereens. The bow section, you can recognize, but after that, it's in so many pieces, you just can't believe it. It is so torn apart. So there was the heartache of seeing the human element, and there was the heartache of seeing that I was going to have to make a major psychological shift in my mind, you know, to realize that this is a new era. Titanic is not the way I want her to be. This is the reality, and I've got to go forward with this.
It's It's difficult to convey just how badly destroyed Titanic really is. The violence the ship underwent as it was torn apart and plunged beneath the ocean's surface is on a scale simply impossible for the human brain to process in its entirety. A ship 882 feet long that had been, just hours earlier, warm, safe and comfortable for hundreds of people, had suddenly become an object diving at speed for the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Bunks and beds that had only just been kept warm by their occupants were plunged into the abyss. Electrical heaters, bed frames, wash stands and basins had all been used by passengers excited to be aboard the largest ship in the world, but then they were strewn across miles and miles of silt to sit in perfect blackness for over 70 years. Titanic has more in common with a massive plane crash. There was nothing genteel or orderly about her demise. The wreck is silent testament to that terrible fact. But so are Ken's paintings. They show it all in visceral detail, the violence and the horror. There's an honesty in Ken's work that I suspect might be a way of processing what he sees down there, coming to terms with something not unlike the loss of a loved one.
It was giving it my best guess. I knew what some of the pieces looked like. I knew where some edges were and where they weren't. I knew at the forward extreme of the stern section and the aft extreme of the shell plating on the bow section. So I knew where some of the breaks were exactly. And in this situation, I think the painting mostly shows the stern. The bow it mostly, sunk at that point, or was mostly down in the water. But yeah, I put actual shell pieces in some of their correct places, as I recall. Of course, it's artwork for a book, so it would just be dead black if I were to paint it accurately.
Right.
So nobody would want to hang that on a wall or want to look at it, as a double-page spread in a book. So you have to jack it up. You have to give it a full moonlight, the whole thing. And so I had to do that. I disagreed with how Jim Cameron showed it in the film. I wasn't there when they were breaking the huge 1/8 scale miniature out in a big tank. I forget where that was, but I wasn't part of the project there. I was working somewhere else on the project. But they had basically designed this miniature to crack like an egg. I mean, right in the middle. And that's kind of the way it comes across, in the movie. And Jim himself, acknowledges today that this is not how Titanic broke apart. I mean, obviously, there were many breaks and many major pieces that tore apart. It was a very, very messy breakup. And I think that's pretty much what I tried to show in my painting, was that fracture, not a clean fracture, but a lot of messy stuff going on. And survivors described sparks flying, So I put that into my painting as well.
Ken had come to know Titanic's wreck extremely well, and in 1991 he collaborated with renowned historian and researcher and longtime friend Don Lynch on An Illustrated History, another one of those crucial books that any enthusiast just has to have. A beautiful retelling of the Titanic story with Don's research and Ken's paintings spectacularly presented. But this book would go on to change Ken and Don's lives because it was picked up by a well-known Hollywood film director with an eye for detail and a reputation for exacting precision. This director had plans for an epic, and it would become a motion picture that would grip the entire world.
And in the early fall of '95, Jim Cameron had just come back from, going out there and shooting those scenes for his planned movie with 20th Century Fox. I saw some newspaper article or heard about it somewhere, got on the phone, spoke to John Bruno at Lightstorm Entertainment in Santa Monica. He was the one I ended up speaking with there. And I introduced myself. Ken Marschall, Don Lynch, and I worked on a book called Titanic, An Illustrated History in 1992. And we've got filing cabinets full of information. Don Lynch is the survivor, the passenger guy, the crew guy. He's got all that. I've got all the archival information having to do with how the ship really looked, to make your miniatures and sets accurate. Anyway, at some point he cut me off and he says, "Oh yes, Titanic in Illustrated History. We've got that book all over the studio here. Jim's bought copies for all of us, and he absolutely wants to meet you. He wants to meet you. He said he wants to meet you guys. He wants you on board."
Brilliant.
So there was another one of those moments where afterwards you hang up the phone and you just think, have I died and gone to heaven or what? So Don and I went up to Lightstorm Entertainment. We met with Jim probably October of '95. Got the ball rolling. He told us all about what he had done, and it's such a long story. But yeah, I ended up being hired on as what they ended up crediting me as the visual historian. Don was the historian. I was the visual historian. I worked with the art department. I advised them on their set designs, trying to get things as accurate as possible. And of course, again, it's compromise. There's going to be compromise. It's inevitable. The budget is not endless. The ship, for example, the full-size set that was built down in Rosarito is not 882 feet 9 inches long. It's about 90% of the full length. But the deck heights are accurate. So actors could walk around and everything looked right. And you never notice on camera that the whole ship is kind of truncated, like you took sandwich slices out of it here and there. The funnels are a little bit closer together than they really were on the ship. And because of that, it was a nightmare. Because of that, they had to scale the funnels down a little bit so that they looked spaced properly. You know what I mean? And anyway, I could go on and on. But so there were lots of compromises, and there were frustrating moments, obviously, because I'm a perfectionist. Jim is also a perfectionist.
Yeah.
But he also realizes that he has a limited budget, and he has to get this movie done for a certain price as best as possible, as best as he could, by a certain date. And it went way over budget, and probably took longer than it was supposed to. I don't remember about the time element, but he did the best he could. I did the best I could. I couldn't be everywhere all the time, obviously. So mistakes would be made on the set over here when I was advising on something else over here. 3 days later, I'd get back over here. And I remember the masts on the full-size set were painted the same color as the funnels. And sorry, Jim, but I think I've said this before in another interview. I don't think it's a big surprise. And he freely admits that there are errors in the movie at this point. Obviously, there have to be. Nobody's perfect. No movie is perfect. But I remember one day, showing up and just saying, "Is that just a primer coat on the? Why are the masts painted the same buff color as the funnels?" "Oh no, that's not a primer. We've already shot scenes around them." And of course, your heart sinks. You think, we got the color just right on the miniature. How long was the miniature?
Oh, that big one was like 40 something feet.
44 feet long, right?
Yeah.
And Jim wanted us to get everything as good as we possibly could on the miniature, and the dictum was, or the order of the day was, make the full size set as accurate as you can and as exactly like the model, as close as you can. And that would, yes sir, that was the rule. And yet here somehow somebody had dropped the ball and the masts were not accurate at all, the wrong color. You don't really notice it in the movie. When the miniature is sailing along, of course, it's the miniature, and the mast is darker than the funnel, and it looks right.
But aside from building massive, near life-size sets, the production team needed to create some of the biggest and most detailed miniatures of the ship ever built. It was Digital Domain, the legendary visual effects company that was tasked with the job, and they'd produce some incredible work. But with the pressures of producing a large-scale Hollywood film come the realities of production. Budget, timeframes, and a demanding workload. Titanic would be no different.
And here's another terrible mistake. Again, Jim, I'm sorry. But this didn't have to do with Jim. This had to do with Digital Domain and the people there that I was working with. They were the ones who built the miniature. And we were, again, I was trying to get every rivet in the right place, or at least I wasn't actually getting my hands dirty and tapping in the rivets. Those were other guys, but I was providing the photographs and the plans to get all of this so accurate. Half of the crew at Digital Domain, the craftsmen, the model builders, I was a godsend because I could answer their questions and, oh, good, here comes Ken. The other half hated my existence. Oh, here comes Ken. He's gonna, let's put this vent in the wrong place to piss him off. You know, I mean, I'm not kidding you. And so I'd be going around saying, you know, these stokehold vents, you've made them all exactly the same. And where's my notebook with the photos? You have this here. See, I made a special guide for you about how all the stokehold. Well, it's too much trouble to make all the stokehold vents differently. So it's just a movie. We're making them all the same. Does Jim know that you feel that way? Because what he told me to do was to make sure that the model's accurate, you know. So we went back and forth like this. And on some things I won and I was able to change and make and correct. Other things, no. Not enough time, we're way over budget, they're good enough. And we had fights, we had confrontations. There was one time I remember where I just said, I'm not coming in anymore. This is a waste of my time and I'm just irritating you. Go with God. You finish this model however you want. Then somebody would hear about that. No, Jim wants you to go back to the studio. He really wants you on the thing. And Rob Legato would get in touch with me. He was the head guy. He says, oh, please don't.
Yeah.
We need to work this out. Here's one of the mistakes that didn't get fixed, and it's the funnels. They're too thin when looking at the ship straight on. How that happened, I don't know. I wasn't making the funnels. I was providing the plans, the photographs, the deck plans, the details to do it. Some person made them way too elliptical. So they look great from broadside, but when the ship is sailing toward you, to this day, I just go, oh. I went in one day, the funnels only had their basic frameworks, like what would you call them? Just like an outline in wood. This is what the funnel. And I think I remember now. I walked to him. I said, "Is this going to be a funnel? I hope not." And they said, yeah, those are our templates. You know, to go inside the metal because they were made out of metal. And I said, no. Let's got my notebooks and all that stuff that they had on hand the whole time. I said, look at the oval. It's a much wider ellipse. It's not so skinny. Like, well, we're not changing that now. Again, this is what you get in the movie biz. You deal with this all the time.
Yeah.
And it was discussed, and one of the head guys there considered it, looked at it, I explained it. He said, yeah, you're right. That's not right. If you can get us the right dimension, if you can fax it to us, and I said, it's right here, but I'll fax it to you again tonight, as soon as I get home, what the dimensions should be. I did so as soon as I got home. Went in the next day, a couple days later, I don't remember what it was, and they had gone ahead and made them the wrong way. Anyway, yeah, you know, we don't have the budget to keep playing around with these. We got to keep the pace up, Ken. Sorry.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are some of the frustrations that happen with any project. They happen on book projects when all I have to do is do a painting, and they say, Ken, you've got to finish the painting now and get a photograph of it and ship it to us because it has to go into layout on Monday, the something or other of the month, you know. But I'm not quite done with it yet. I haven't checked.
Yeah.
Got to do it. Got to slop on that. Got to finish it. Got to send it off. And that's just the way life is. And it's the bane. It's the bane of the existence of any guy who has a perfectionistic nature. It's something you just have to live with. You have to deal with.
James Cameron's Titanic was an historical epic that required all the knowledge and skill of hundreds of craftsmen, artists, designers, labourers, engineers, technicians, historians, and many, many more. In many ways, it was an undertaking as ambitious and impressive as the original ship's construction, and probably the culmination of it all was the completion of the near life-size set at Rosarito, Mexico. Ken, who had studied Titanic's every minute detail and got to know the ship as intimately as a dear friend, was given a unique opportunity to step aboard and see it for himself. Not as a black and white photograph or a grainy bit of footage taken miles underwater, but as a living, breathing thing.
The whole experience of walking onto that nearly full-size set is just incredible. For all intents and purposes, even though everywhere I looked, I saw something that wasn't quite perfect. You know, the corner of this deck house should be rounded. It shouldn't be. So the radius is too tight, or whatever the issue was. The amount of detail that was there and the amount of effort that went into reproducing, for example, the first class stateroom windows along A deck forward, things like that. It was awesome. We didn't refer to it as the stage. It was called Stage 1. And we didn't refer to it as going on board Stage 1. We called it going on the ship. And and all the extras, you know, that worked on the film as well, said the same thing. You know, well, it's time to go back on board the ship. You know, you got to think of it as the ship, and it was just so realistic. The fittings, the nautical arrangements, the rope everywhere. Well, the rigging that was used for the funnels, they used black nylon stuff, which was awful. Should have been a steel gray galvanized, you know, spun steel. But it ended up somehow being black, jet black. So that was annoying. Again, you probably don't notice it watching the movie, but things like that. But when they got the smoke pots going in those funnels, and because of the direction of the wind, the prevailing breeze down there in Rosarito, Baja California, Mexico, it blew the smoke aft, and it was just, the hair stood up on your arm, you know, when you were walking around. It was just so incredible. And when they angled the ship to 6 degrees for the sinking, this is something that I learned, was that you get used to it. You get used to that angle, even though it's up to 6 degrees, which is, you know, substantial. I don't know what 6 degrees is, something like that.
Yeah.
And you would think, oh, everybody's going to be, we're sinking. We got to get in lifeboats. I mean, the end is near. And you wonder why all the passengers didn't rush the boats. But you realize when you experience it quickly how you adapt to this angle, and you just don't notice it so much at all. You tend to think, yeah, maybe we're tipped a little bit, but it's not really, you know, dangerous. So that was something that stuck with me. Another memory that was really an epiphany was the davits. They were made by the original company, the Welland Company, just like the original davits. All those years later, the same company made the davits for the movie set. The difference, however, is that they made them beefier. They made them more sturdy. There are more safety regulations today. Even though the boats were much lighter for the film set, they were shorter than the real life boats. They were made out of, you know, fiberglass and so forth. They just weren't as big and heavy. They were never going to be quite filled as much as the real lifeboats were with all these people. Even though that weight was a lot less, there were some regulations that required them to make the davit arms wider and much more reinforced. So that was one of my very minor disappointments. It was so cool that they were made by Welland. It worked the same, and the mechanism, everything looked the same, except the arms themselves are too fat. Damn it. But anyway, here's the epiphany. During the launching scenes, you would see the boats going down. You know, the Murdoch would be, you know, lower away, and you see the end of the davits going like this. And we thought, God, as reinforced as those davits are, think of how the original davits with much heavier boats, think of how they must have flexed and gone back. No wonder people didn't want to get into lifeboats. So that's what occurred to me right off the bat. So that was quite a revelation. And I'm sure there are others as well. But, you know, watching, I mean, Don Lynch and other friends of mine were on a small barge floating off the side of the full-size set one night when Jim was shooting the boat 13 coming down and boat 15 coming down almost on it, that whole scene, and the chaos and the stop lowering and trying to cut the ropes, all that stuff. My heart pounded so hard watching that thing. You know, it was like watching, except for the fact that they had these bluish colored night suns that were lighting up the ship like a full moon. You forget about that pretty soon. You realize it's a movie. We're shooting a movie here. But aside from that, gosh, the shell door that's right there, and the guy's trying to close the shell door. It was such a beautiful recreation of what really must have happened that night, and it just made your heart pound watching it happen.
The movie went on to become the biggest box office hit in history for the time, grossing $2.26 billion globally and sparking a Titanic renaissance. It thrust Ken, Don Lynch, and the other researchers who'd helped on the movie into the spotlight and paved the way for a whole new era of exploring and researching the ship. In a way, Cameron had ensured the preservation of the real Titanic's legacy with the success of his film, because the enormous international appetite for Titanic books, documentaries, films, games, and more meant real-world missions to the wreck would be greenlit with bigger and better cameras and technology. The mania even led directly to the commission of the last ocean liner to be built, Queen Mary 2. So yeah, it was a pretty big deal. Somebody once reported that Ken had seen the film over 100 times, but he insists that isn't true. But still, he's definitely seen it.
I've seen it. I've seen it many, many times. I would love to see it again in beautiful, super high res, 4K 3D. I only saw that one twice. You know, the 3D, it's incredible what they did. They had a team of like 300 guys someplace, painstakingly converting that film into 3D. I can't even imagine. I don't know how they did it. I don't even necessarily want to know how they did it, because it would spoil the magic of it. But I was blown away to see that come to life in stereo like that up on the big screen.
It's been 28 years since the world first saw Titanic on the big screen, but for Ken, probably nothing can beat seeing it for the very first time. After all the work, the frustrations, and the toil, there she was, the ship brought back to life.
It was just the icing on the cake, as you can imagine. All I was aware of were all these little bits, and I've never seen a second of film. All I'd seen is the sets and the actors doing their thing, and then the first time that I saw it was a pretty much a finished cut. It wasn't. I couldn't call it a rough cut. It was an extended version. It was like maybe 3.5 hours long, and it was at Lightstorm Entertainment. It was just a private screening with maybe 30 other people or something. And that was the first time I saw it. And so it was just amazing to see the whole thing come together seamlessly and come to life, and to hear the score and the acting, and how the acting actually comes across on screen and all of that. And as I've said so many times, he brought Titanic to life in full color. It was just after Raise the Titanic, it was without a doubt the most, exciting, thing I had done, in my life, to be a part of a project like that. I was so very proud of it. In the end, what I want to say is, although there were disappointments and frustrations, as there are with any project that you work on, certainly one of this scale, where there's an army of people building sets and doing all of this stuff, and little old me certainly cannot be everywhere. I can't be looking over everybody's shoulder. Mistakes are going to be made. Even if I did point out some mistake, the decision may be made to go ahead and make it incorrectly for various reasons, logical reasons that I might not like at the time, but they need to do it that way. In spite of all that, the overall experience, I am so grateful to Jim, because it led to so many projects after that. We became a family at that point. he invited me to participate with him on so many documentaries and so many expeditions back to Titanic, which, brings us up to the Ghost of the Abyss expedition in 2001, where I got to dive 4 times and really explore the ship myself, visually with my own eyes, personally, firsthand, to be able to help Jim down there as he was inside piloting an ROV around. We'd be outside with the Russian pilot, Zhenya. I would be in Mir 2 with another observer. And there were 3 of us, and we would be moving around in the current and shining light in through windows, stained glass windows and portholes, so that he could get dramatic lighting, because he's all about light. And I'm all about light. I'm all about light when it comes to my paintings too. Light is critical. It is everything. Color is so important. He and I love the color blue, and he knew just how he wanted these interior bot views as he's flying these bots around. He wanted the lights. I understood what he wanted, and I was communicating with Zhenya, who spoke English rather well. And I would say, okay, we need to do another take. Let's move up and then drift back in the current again and shine through that D-deck shell door, right through that grilled gate at the main first class entrance there. And we'd come by again, and I'd pick up the UQC, forget what that stands for, underwater something or other. Anyway, it's the underwater acoustic radio that they use, to communicate back. And I'd say, how was that, Jim? How did that look? And he called back at one point. He said, love it, love it, love it. I'll always remember that. Apparently we did a good job with the lighting, at least on that particular scene.
Ghosts of the Abyss is a spectacular documentary with some of the finest footage of Titanic ever filmed. But it was originally intended to be part of a larger production, comparing Titanic with another wreck close to Cameron's heart, the German battleship Bismarck. The warship lies deeper than Titanic, but is unbelievably well preserved. But during filming on Titanic, global events were to take an unexpected, tragic turn.
And the time is 6:16, September 11th, 2001. Indeed. See you later.
We felt like we were the proverbial last people on Earth to find out what happened that day.
Yeah.
Because we were down exploring the wreck, and we had a very productive day with the bots, getting footage inside, rescuing the bot Elwood that day, safely rescuing like a $250,000 bot or whatever the thing was worth. It was just so many positive things that happened that day. And then when we got back up on the surface and were hoisted back on the Russian support ship, the Keldysh, and then the first thing we heard, there was Bill Paxton at the bottom of the ladder when I was climbing down. Hey, we rescued Elwood. I said, he said, yeah, they're calling it Black Tuesday. These terrorists, and he told us about flew jets, passenger jets full of people into the World Trade Center. And I was still saying, but we rescued, what do you mean? What, passenger jets, what? No, they fell down, the towers, one fell down, then the other. It's all on MSNBC. We're getting occasional intermittent, reception. You can see it on the TV. As Jim came up after we did, he was the second sub to surface. First thing he said when he came out of the sub, he was looking at everybody's expression. He said, what happened? What happened? It was, anyway, so that's another memory that brings you together. It makes you all a family, an experience like that on an expedition. And then, months later, back in Rosarito, there were still a lot of sets around from the movie that were still there and in storage and being preserved. And Jim shot the 3D scenes with us actors. He built a little part of the set again on a green screen. Everything was green screened, and he wanted me to play Ismay, so he fixed me up with the Snidely Whiplash, mustache. And 2 of my sisters were extras in it. And
cool.
Was Clark Stevenson, Don Lynch. It was the family, Judy Preston Lindsay, Ellen Moore O'Brien, who were extras on the film, the original movie. They were there. He brings you back. Once you've worked with him and you've done a good job, you're part of the Cameron family. And he trusts you and he brings you back. And it's been going on to this day. I'm still involved with projects with Jim. Like I said, there's just been so many. I mean, look at the coffee table book. It came out in 2013, Exploring the Deep. Yeah. Very proud of that. And there's just always stuff happening. So as much as I carp about the tiny little things in the movie Titanic that might not be just right, I hope he understands that that's just because I'm a crazy perfectionist. You know, the overall impression and memory of the whole thing is one of incredible gratitude for bringing the ship to life like nobody ever has before. I just have to say how lucky I have been throughout my life to have been able to live this dream, this experience. I mean, truly, there are so many people who are unhappy in their line of work. They've never traveled much. I've been all over the world. I've studied, I've gone to museums in England and Ireland. I've been to the wreck many times. I've dived 6 times personally. And things that you just can't even buy. I mean, just experiences that you can't even put a price to. And the people that I've met, the survivors whom I've met, including Lusitania survivors as well. I've been a lucky guy. If I drop dead tomorrow, I have no regrets.
I guess in some ways, Ken has kind of been lucky. He was in exactly the right place and time to become the Titanic visual subject matter expert. But it took an unbelievable, almost unfathomable amount of work to accomplish a career as varied and as influential as his. He's inspired generations of maritime history enthusiasts, myself included, to look at the past with a discerning eye, an exacting standard for detail. It's the same kind of approach that pushed me to make my illustrations of that ship and others. So, what next? Well, it would appear that we're heading into a whole new golden age of Titanic research. The release of Magellan's digital twin of the Titanic wreck has opened up unbelievable new opportunities to explore and learn all about the ship. It's a kind of forensic record, but so are Ken's paintings. He knows the wreck so well that it's hard to imagine somebody better suited to exploring it virtually. So, join us next time on the channel when Ken and I sit down for a tour of Magellan's bow scans in vROV Pilot, when we piece apart Titanic's final moments and all that has happened in the last 40 years since she was discovered. You won't want to miss it. And to Ken, I'm sure we can all say a very hearty bravo Zulu, well done, and thank you for such an incredible body of work.